Every month, Creative Mornings has one theme that all cities around the world explore, and ours was simplicity. So I'm going to start with a little story. I have this memory of sitting at the dinner table with my parents and my little sister. And my parents used to be heavy smokers, so the walls were kind of like a yellow stained, wash that you couldn't really get out with any kind of bleach. The good news is that they quit smoking 7 years ago. But, I just remember the colors, right? And how that created a palette for this dinner table. At that dinner table, there were 2 phones. One was a rotary phone, because it was our personal house phone, and the other was the phone for the building, because my mom was a superintendent and my dad was the janitor. So at any given point in the day, sometimes all day, that phone would be ringing for a repair. It would be ringing because a tenant locked themselves out of the house. It'd be ringing to rent an apartment. And above these 2 phones was this piece by Paul Gauguin, not the actual piece, the poster from the Met, 2 Tahitian women made in 1899. So if your family is anything like mine, the dinner table was a place of total chaos. Okay, it was the place where we laughed together. There were many tears. I got grounded many, many times. But even in spite of that, it was a place I could go for clarity. The other thing about the chaos at that dinner table is that the phone was ringing nonstop. So at any given moment, we would be having dinner or having a serious conversation together, and that phone would be ringing, calling my mom away to rent an apartment or my dad to fix a leak. Now, not chaotic and actually simplistic to the point of absolute nonsense is this painting right here. Because as we know, according to the Met, Paul Gauguin thought of this as the true depiction of 2 brown women. 2 brown women that he knew nothing about and used to advance his own career. According to the Met, he relied on gesture and facial expression to evoke the ideal Tahitian woman. Very subtle, very knowing in her naivete, her exoticism, the perfect Eve, capable of walking around naked without shame. And I guess the point that I'm trying to make here is that in this quest for simplicity, we should not confuse what is simple for what is easy. Because simple is not easy. Making anything simple or simplifying anything is very, very hard. And I think that the challenge for us is going to be finding simplicity and clarity amongst the chaos. It's understanding that simplicity is deeply connected to realness, to understanding, to transparency, and to authenticity. So at that table, a few things happened. Number one, I realized I was so much more interested in all the stories behind the painting than painting myself. So I wanted to know why Gauguin painted this. What were his motivations? What was happening at that time? Who were these women? So right away, I knew I was attached to the stories behind the work. The other thing that happened is I learned how to make a lot with very little, knowing that if you have the right people around you, a lot is possible. And the last piece is that I knew the dinner table was a place that I could come to clear my head. And, I started thinking when I was going through the motions of, thinking about this talk and what I wanted to share today, why is it that the most chaotic place in the house is also the place that I found the most clarity? Maybe it's because the path isn't always the unobstructed one. Basically, the best path isn't always the beaten path. Sometimes it's the path that you have to make for yourself. It's the one that you have to remove obstacles for. Unless you can hire someone to pave the way for you, you are most often than not going to be the person to put your own bricks down or to decide that you don't even want bricks on your path. Maybe you're going to fly to wherever you're going. And I think these are really the tenets of a radical imagination. I'm going to fast forward you 7 years. Not 7 years from then, but 7 years ago, okay? I guess that's not a fast forward. I'm going to take you back 7 years ago. I was on the phone with one of my dear friends, Rebecca Monson, And I happened to be saying something very casually, chatting it up as I often do, letting her know that I was going to go meet an artist in their studio because I was curious about their practice, and we had set up a time. And she was like, wait, how do you do that? I want to do that. And because it's Rebecca Monson, and any of you who know her know that she's an ops person, a storyteller, a community builder by nature, know that the very question that followed after that is, how can we make sure that everybody knows that they can meet artists where they are? And so from that, we began the journey of designing a program and exploring models that would A, acknowledge and dismantle barriers to access in the art world, B, nurture a more connected and open-minded Miami. We wanted to see a Miami that was more artist invested all year round. And C, connect locals to the incredible artists who are right in our backyard. I think at the time it felt like Art Basel was taking a lot of space in the air, and a lot of folks didn't know that this ecosystem happens all year round. And the programming that around talks or studio visits or collector homes is something that they could be accessing in their own backyard. So in sum, and most importantly, the question was obviously, how do we support artists? Well, sometimes the answers are simple, but not easy. I mean, how do we reduce poverty? We give more people more money. How do we get rest? Well, we do less. How do we support artists? We buy their work. We support their practice. Again, simple answers, not easy to implement. And because we know there are systemic inequities that always complicate the very straightforward answers to these simple questions, our path with Commissioner was really to start exploring models that cut through the fat and take down the fences to bring more people together around the artists in our communities. So 1 year after that phone call, we launched Commissioner. Basically, we did it with 40 members, mostly strangers who had heard about us through the New Tropic, maybe on WLRN, the Miami New Times, and with a little grant that we got from the Night Arts Challenge that helped sustain us for 2 years. Commissioner is a membership program that pools members' fees to commission 4 artists per year for our 40 members. And at the end of the season, every member receives 4 artworks that they can add to their collection. So because we are intentional about people buying into an ethos of collaboration and collectivism, it's really a mystery. I mean, people buy into the program without knowing who the artists are going to be. And that's really because we're trying to mobilize communities to think about the vision first. And then when we announce the artists, we don't tell you what the artwork is going to be. And that's in part because we really want to do the work of sharing the stories of the artists, exploring their practice, do storytelling in partnership with folks at South Florida PBS or the New Tropic, so you get to know the person over the object. At the end of the day, for us, it's always going to be about people over things. There's this statistic that in 2003, the Urban Institute conducted a study which revealed that 96% of Americans valued art in their lives, while only 27% actually value artists. So it may not be a shocker that these stats prioritize output over folks. I mean, until very recently, that's what one might have said about education, where we say that we care about education, but we're not fighting for equity in teachers' pay. So understanding that we're all in different places in our lives, whether that be financial or in our experience with art and with how we support organizations, the fact is that if we don't step up to support the things that we value, no one else will. We cannot count on the private sector. We cannot count on the private sector to do the work of individuals who are invested in the community. In addition to collector memberships, we created a patron level where for about $90 to $120 a year, folks can just participate in all of the events and receive a curated selection of passes to Miami Art Week. Whereas you'll see a lot of organizations use membership as a way to fundraise because that is part of their financial model. For us, it's not the financial model. It is the thing. It is the program. So for us, it's about inviting folks to really just get a little bit skin in the game. For anyone who's ever made the leap and bought a piece by somebody they know or that's aligned with their core values, it's really a feeling like no other to develop that kind of relationship and that connection where you can continue the conversation and follow the person's trajectory. So the goal isn't so that people collect solely within Commissioner. Rather, it's that we create a much wider, enduring ripple effect, and people start purchasing work on their own from the gallery, or maybe start volunteering at a museum as a docent. Maybe we should get them on the acquisitions board so that they can have a say how the museums acquire their pieces and which stories that they're elevating. For us, the ripple effect is when artists are valued and people are compensated for their creative labor, we start having a more just society. Since 2018, we have welcomed approximately 40 collectors and 40 patrons to every season of Commissioner, creating a pool of $60,000 that goes toward artist commissions. What I'm saying is that we don't give memberships as discounts. People aren't becoming members so they could get access to cheaper work. What we are doing is we are creating a model that helps people understand that we can do together what we may not be able to do alone. And for us, that's really an organizing model. As we embark on our 6th season now, we're about to commission our 22nd artist, and now we have placed over 800 works in the hands of new and beginner collectors. When we first started, we joked that Commissioner is like the wine club of art. You know, you don't know what you're gonna get, you're gonna try something new, you're gonna develop your palette, exposure will help. But over the years, we've learned that that's actually not true at all. It's never actually about you, the collector. It's never about the wine or the acquisition. It's about what happens when we work together to dismantle the barriers that stop us from achieving what we can do together. So it's much more like a coalition. It's like organizing people around care, humanity, ideals that all of us deserve. We're talking about collecting art, but we could be talking about supporting teachers. We could be talking about supporting neighbors. We could be talking about a food pantry. This model applies to every sector. And if we can begin to move in a more just society, and here I'm quoting my dear friend, then we can imagine a place of mutual support where we are all recognized for who we are over the value of what we produce. So, the other tenet of our program at Commissioner is really around education. So in addition to the financial model that really centers the collective over the individual, we care about learning. Many folks do not support artists in a meaningful way because they simply don't have the tools or the knowledge to do so in a way that they feel confident. Unless you had a family member or a teacher or maybe a mentor who showed you the way, it's really hard to know where to start. I mean, for most artists, the space is very opaque. There's no program or, career path that says, go to art school, and then you'll get picked up by an art gallery, and then you'll be shown in museums, and then you're an artist. If you're an artist, you're just an artist. And similarly, right, as a collector, if you're a collector, you don't have to be a collector as a collector of luxury goods or of things. Art is not so precious that all of us shouldn't have access to it. If you're a collector, you can just be a supporter of artists in your community. It doesn't need to look a certain way or go by a certain name. And so with that, we have found that people simply just don't participate in the art market, often because they don't understand. And of all who are part of this ecosystem, because it truly is an ecosystem. It's an ecosystem of curators, art advisors, museums, gallerists, etc. When we fail to reach broader communities outside of the art world, it's always going to be the artist who is most impacted. So the art world, and I just kind of want to acknowledge here that the art world isn't a monolith, right? The art world is a multiverse, but the way that I'm using it here really references the $68 billion unregulated market where most of the money is made on $1 million art sales. So I'm talking about the art market in this sense as like the beast. It's the process of exchanging and selling and the confluence of influences and gatekeeping that happens, and that stops people, just people who care about artists, from knowing how to support each other and support these artists that they care about. So collecting art in this art world has often just been felt as elitism, right? It's like money on the wall. Tell me you're rich without telling me you're rich. When the US was formed, and I'm gonna get all like foundational on you here, when the US was formed, we relegated our most important responsibilities, right, to philanthropy, to big businesses. And so our PR spins consecrated and taxes evaded. Our government or our founding fathers basically said education, that's the job of philanthropy or a private sector. Healthcare, also the job of the private sector. And art and culture, so is the job of the private sector. But we, again, cannot count on the private sector. Capitalism and elitism have by design created an ever-increasing gap of information between the average person and access to knowledge. And a few centuries of Eurocentricity, imperialism, othering, brand positioning, and you really have an art world that's built for very few, where even less people can engage and contribute in a meaningful way. But to look at this art world, to look at this behemoth as just like a series of dollar signs and numbers would really rob us of our civic ability to participate. We have a right to be part of this, and just because we can acknowledge a past that was just because we can acknowledge a challenging past doesn't mean, again, that we can't remove the obstacles and pave a way for the future that we want to see. We can decide to be unapologetic in going to these galleries that are actually free and open to the public and asking for the price list and asking about a payment plan and learning about the artists. We can also decide that we want to meet artists who are in our communities very early in their careers and make the bet because we know it's good. We don't need to wait for somebody to put something in a frame or on a white wall to tell us it's culture. We are from here. And so if we can trust ourselves and really learn to rely on each other and each other's expertise, then we can do that too. We can also decide what stories we want to see elevated. We can figure out how we infiltrate the apparatuses of the museums, of the institutions, so that we can build power with folks that we care about. And it's not to say that our institutions aren't thinking about this or there aren't galleries thinking about this. This isn't a us against them. It's really about an us all together. So millennials right now, the younger generation of collectors, I guess that's not millennials anymore, that's a whole other generation, but millennials specifically and the young generation of collectors are attracted by art that mirrors their lives, tastes, political and ethical values. We see this a lot in the rise of sales through the digital market, basically on Instagram. More people are buying the artwork that aligns with their values. That's not to say that it doesn't have an aesthetic value. It's just to say that it's important to consider who is making the art and what the stories are being told and who we choose to elevate. To quote Suzanne Vielmetter, this is not Suzanne Vielmetter, but to quote Suzanne Vielmetter from a recent talk that she did at the Armory Show in New York, the art market at the end of the day is really us. People are the market, right? The market are the artists and it's the collectors. And if the power is in the hands of these artists and these collectors, what could happen if we organized around what we wanted to see preserved as the artifacts of our time, right? Like if we are the market and we decided collectively that we wanted to change, what could we do, right, to shift some of these behaviors? Earlier, I spoke about the art world as a multiverse, and that's really true. There's the $68 billion market, and there's the magic that happens right here in the room, and that happens down the street in the artist studios, and that can also happen with each other at a dinner table. So these are the questions we really try to ask ourselves when thinking about the artists we commission and the monthly events that we offer at Commissioner. We ask ourselves, is there artistic rigor in the artwork? We look at artists who are crossing a variety of mediums, backgrounds, and perspectives. And we think about the ideas, gestures, materials, and processes, the works where the artist's ideas really meet the execution and the moment to share the stories of our broader communities. if we were to do a meetup at PAM in 2050, we should totally do a meetup at PAM in 2050. Could we look at the collection powered by this generation of folks who have pooled their funds together to commission local artists in our communities and say, right, does this collection represent the soul, the joy, and the sweat of Miami at this time of rapid gentrification, climate crisis, and deep division? Can we say that we made a mark and we have the artifacts of our time improve and share the stories that brought us joy? So the collection, although truly powerfully aesthetic, is really meant to be rooted in a kind of realness that serves both as a timestamp of what's happening in our city, but also as a launch pad for the artists. Maybe it's the $68 million art market. I don't know. Maybe they're coming saying, stop talking shit about us. So earlier in February, we had the joy of commissioning artist Michelle Lisa Polissin. It's a collaboration that we did with Maven Leadership Collective and Diaspora Vibe Cultural Arts Incubator. I'm gonna pass around the art piece, but I'm warning you that I want it back. And if you can just start passing it around. I want to talk a little bit about this work as an example of some of these ideas that we're talking about. So Michelle Lisa Polissin is a Haitian American artist. She has a studio at Bakehouse Art Complex, and she's a photographer, but she also works a lot with collage, with design, and as you can see, with textiles, with her sewing machine. For us, she decided that she wanted to create a food platter that represented the diaspora as well that lives in Miami, but also all around the continent and really all around the world. How can we look at our communities and cross-pollination and the ways that we come together through the lens of food and fabric? So, I mean, depending where you're from, right, this has a different name, right? Like maybe it's refried beans, maybe it's like black beans. It can really just be anything. But here you can see that Michelle created, or rather designed, a pattern that kind of paid homage to this ingredient in our community. What she also did here, right? I mean, maybe it's pickles, but maybe it's ceviche, right? Like, and that's really what she tried to do here is think about using this Dutch African wax fabric pattern, a pattern that really has its roots in colonialism and imperialism that has been remixed and reclaimed by countries around the continent. Think of it often as just like, you know, patterns from West Africa. But this is something that was discarded by the Dutch and that was really reimagined and like I said, reclaimed by folks who actually live there on the continent as a matter of fashion, design, owning the narrative. Maduros, or sweet plantain, I mean, who's hungry? She created this wonderful pattern here. And what I love and what you may be seeing for the folks who've seen the pieces, right, is that everything is stitched together. So the fact that this is a textile really kind of is a nod to the invisible labor, to the domestic workers, to the women who didn't get acknowledged. What Michelle did is use women's work, right, to create this piece. And then she created 5 editions of 10. Each, and I'm only showing 3 here, but each of them kind of organized in different patterns. So it's almost like you literally have a different platter of food, right? Or like a different combination of culture, right, happening in each piece. This is one of our members, Michael John, who's proudly holding his piece, and Jay, who's proudly holding his piece. But what you'll also notice in passing this piece around is rather than frame the edges or smooth out the edges, the fabric is wrapped around. Why? Because who's ever gotten a plate of any of this without the food spilling over the sides, right? And so, you know, what Michelle is really doing is speaking of our cultures as they come together and thinking about the medium and the materials to do that. It's really the rigor of the history, of understanding the labor, the invisible labor, of elevating the voices, and of bringing it together in one piece that really captures the multiplicity, right, that happens here in Miami. So these are some of the things that really excite us about Commissioner. A few stories, right? By commissioning artists, we have found that this enduring ripple effect is really taking root. How do you support artists? Again, buy their work, support their practice. But then how do you decide what work to buy? Well, you ultimately are just going to buy the work that you love. This happens to be one for me from Michelle, but there are so many others in this collection and really just outside of Commissioner that I feel so passionate about. By commissioning artists and learning about the arts together, not only are we becoming more active patrons, we're just becoming volunteers, advocates, and organizers. We're starting to use our social and cultural capital to move the needle and throw our weight around a little bit, but you know, with care and with love. We're doing a lot of unlearning and reimagining what are the systems, or rather, what are the processes, pathways in which we want to behave and see behaviors changed. So 2 years into the program, so much started happening. Now we're on season 6, but I'll take you back to season 3. We collaborated with artists Shira Reagans and Lonnie Johnson to address gun violence and mounted an exhibition at the Bakehouse. At the time, and we do this with every artist, we started thinking, well, how do we align policy? How do we think of advocacy? Who do we need to call? So we called our local politicians, but we also called national publications, and we engaged our scholars. Next week now, because of some of these calls, there's going to be a symposium convening 30 artists. It's called Still Here, Generations of Black Miami Art Making, in collaboration with Center for Global Black Studies that explores these topics. Because of conversations like these, we're planting the seeds so we can think about getting the kind of scholarship and academia that supports a lot of these ideas. In season 5, a few of our founding members and partners went to Detroit because we launched a chapter in Detroit. And together, we wanted to understand the landscape more deeply. We also went to New York, to West Palm Beach, and to most recently to Montreal. This is a photo of all of the folks who joined us on the Montreal trip on the doorstep of my parents' home. So, I mean, here you have locals, local artists, you have visitors from Miami, some folks from LA and DC. The idea that we were all just able to get together around art and conversation and each other. Yeah, those are my parents up there at the top. By this time, and as you can imagine, like, members are working directly with artists and collecting directly from galleries. They're not always going through Commissioner or always supporting the artists that we're programming, and that's really the point. People are starting to do the thing that we talk about on our own. So if collaboration were ever to be the tool, then community truly is the bridge. We always hoped that Commissioner would offer a model of support, one of mutual support more specifically, that could be applied to different fields or that could be adopted to individuals. We want to see more collector circles. We want to see more giving circles. We want to see collector clubs. If individuals start doing the work of Commissioner on their own with a few friends, then we'll really start to see the landscape change. So again, how much or how do you support artists? You buy their work. How do you decide what to buy? Well, you buy what you love. And how do you know what you love? Well, you support what you care about. In the end, these very straightforward answers, right, to simple questions. But is it easy? No. This is not easy, but it's worth it. And what we find in this clarity of an often overcomplicated art space is by focusing on the issues that we care about and aligning with people who can share their knowledge and relationships, we're able to move in a way that really benefits the whole. So, as we enter our 6th season of Commissioner, and I'm wrapping up, don't worry, as we enter our 6th season of Commissioner, Rebecca and I have been evaluating and reevaluating some of our early assumptions, as every organization should. And one moment that comes to mind is at the season finale of our 1st season, somebody asked us, what's next for Commissioner? How are you expanding? What can we look forward to? We were quick to say that the goal really wasn't expansion in a vertical way, but thinking a lot more how we can remain a horizontal or a flat model. And we also explained that we imagined ourselves opening up different chapters in different cities, kind of really looking at the CreativeMornings model, right? Where maybe a few years from now, we can be in 10 cities, 20 cities, and have chapters in each one of them. But you know, after launching Detroit, and now after doing our first international art trip to Montreal, it's feeling like that might just be a little bit prescriptive and may not really serve the artists in the way that we're hoping to. Because if we confine ourselves to only supporting the artists in our cities and hope that they only stay in our cities, what we're not doing is giving them the agency, right, and the support or the launch pad to pursue any path they want. Isn't that really what we want for each other? We want to be able to incubate talent, and we want to be able to support talent. But then we also want to see it travel the world, and we want to go there too. So we're starting to think of Commissioner as a much more trans-territorial project, where maybe we start following the artists in Miami wherever they go. I mean, that makes for a lot of fun travel, but it also makes for a lot of deep cross-pollination, exchanging ideas, and that's what we're seeing happening with Detroit. Detroit doesn't have the same challenges that Miami has, so the program really isn't the same, and that's kind of the point, right? You don't want to create like a cookie-cutter model for every city. Really what you want to do, right, is you want more agency, you want more freedom. Like, we all want a sense to be able to do whatever we want. And that keeps on coming back to the fact that we're not just talking about supporting artists, we're really talking about supporting society in a much more real way. And so in closing, thank you for listening today. And also, you know, I hope that you'll take a look at Commissioner, consider joining. We often have events that are open to the public. So, you know, just hang out with us. You each received a custom risograph by poet Arsamer McCoy that was designed by Mariana and Sebastian. And if you follow the path of the infographic, it's really all about belonging and the ways that remind us that we can go wherever we want to if we decide that's where we want for ourselves. So truly broadening the pool of collectors and doing the deep work, really, it's not the easy approach. But when we meet people where they are, wherever they are, it feels pretty straightforward. Thank you.